In a blessing for Mother's Day, colleague and Unitarian Universalist minister Lisa Bovey-Kemper writes this: "In this circle of care, we make space for the complexity of life, the myriad experiences that bless and break our hearts. The truth of human experience dictates that on any given day, we each come to the table with hearts in different places. And it is especially so on this day, invented to honor women who nurture. In this circle of care, we honor the truth that mothering is not and never will be quantified in one single descriptor. Mothering can be elusive or infuriating, fulfilling or confusing, commonplace or triumphant. It exists in the everyday experiences of every person. There is no human being that is not connected to or disconnected from a mother. We are connected to mothering, whether we've carried a child or not, whether we've had good relations with our mothers or not, whether we wonder if our mothering has been enough or too much. And today we are connected to mothering because we hold the reality that the highest court in the land will most certainly strike down the ability for people to choose whether or not to be mothers in over half the states in our nation. Although most of us knew this was coming, it is a blow. Although most of us knew that Roe v. Wade has never made reproductive choice accessible to everyone because it's so riddled with white normatives and socioeconomic privileges, it is still a blow. The most intimate and profound decisions of when and whether to parent will no longer be protected as a human right, says my friend and colleague, Reverend Kelly Clement. It is a blow, and we feel it, especially on this invented holiday of celebrating and honoring mothers. Still, I've often wondered about honoring this day differently. Instead of focusing on our individual experiences of mothers, of being mothered well or not being mothered well, or our individual experiences of being a mother or not being a mother, or getting it totally left out of the equation if you're a father, because let's face it, Father's Day has always gotten short shrift. I would like to propose a different kind of honoring, a less individualistic understanding of this day. I'd like to propose a day honoring mothering. Honoring mothering. The qualities of mothering that we all have given and received. Those qualities that promote growth and flourishing. Those qualities that strengthen the hearts of individuals and in so doing the heart of community. The quality of loving that is both free-flowing and obedient, that root us in our lives, that protect us, that makes room for us and gathers us in. There's a sense of sacrament in mothering, a visible sign of an invisible spiritual truth. We could call it Mothering Day, and it would belong to everyone. So to tease out these qualities of mothering, given and received by all of us, I'm inspired to turn to the wisdom of trees and the profound and groundbreaking work of Susan Simard, a scientist, professor, forest lover, and environmental hopefulist. Yes, you've heard me right, and an activist of hope, a hopefulist. In 1997, the young PhD student, Susan Simard, went out into her beloved forests of British Columbia, where she had been born and raised and shaped, to conduct an experiment for her PhD project. She wanted to see how carbon moved from tree to tree. So she set up this experiment in which she planted a Douglas fir and a paper birch next to one another. She labeled the trees with isotopes or markers. One tree got C14 and the other C13 so that she could track what was being exchanged between the trees. She then went on to shade these trees with little tents throughout the multi-year experiment to create different scenarios to which the trees might respond. In the first year of the experiment, with the trees growing naturally, the Douglas fir and the paper birch did indeed find connection with one another and exchanged nutrients and carbon in this beautiful reciprocity between species, back and forth, each exchanging what they had. They used this great underground highway, which is made of mycorrhizal fungi or mushroom networks and their own root systems in this symbiotic communion for mutual benefit. Now, in the second year, she tried something different. She shaded the Douglas fir to different degrees with her tents. The more the fir tree was deprived of its food, that is light and air, the more stressed out the Douglas fir became. And the more nutrients and carbon the birch gave to the fir tree. The more stressed out the fir became, the more nutrients and carbon the birch gave to the fir tree. The birch was nurturing the Douglas fir, protecting it, sacrificing for it. This was the exact opposite of everything science had said so far. The overwhelming narrative, and still is for that matter, is that competition is the driving force of nature. That evolution depends on the survival of the fittest and exploitation is baked into our DNA. Instead, Susan was coming to understand the deeply cooperative nature of life, that one species would sacrifice for another's well-being in some kind of great exchange and healing. She characterizes this pivotal experiment as elementary in comparison with what we now know, and yet was such an important awakening in forestry and science. She recounts how people threw rotten eggs at her after her paper was published because it so upended their notion of the order of things. In those days, no one used to use the word communicate when characterizing the relationship between trees in a forest, but that is exactly what's going on. Scientists are coming to understand what indigenous folks have been saying for a millennium or more. The trees talk. Trees talk, and trees listen. When you step onto a forest floor, there are 300 miles of fungal and root networks below your feet. 300 miles of communicating software. Everything is talking. Everything is listening. What we call a forest is actually a fraction of what a forest really is. Most of it is below the surface, far from the human eye. And throughout any forest are large mother trees, as Suzanne calls them, or grandmother trees, as indigenous people have named them. The mother trees act as centralized hubs, supporting communication, nutrient exchange, and healing gestures among trees. These trees are mothering the forest. They are communitarians. They use their deep roots to draw up water and share it with the shallow-rooted seedlings. The mothering trees detect when their neighbors or their kin are in distress and send them nutrients to support their health and healing. They make room for the kids of the forest by reducing root competition. They infect young saplings with mycorrhizal fungi, pulling them into that supportive embrace of community, the wood-wide web, where help and nurturing is available. And there is this incredible giveaway that happens at the end of a mother tree's life. When a Douglas fir, for example, understands that it is dying, it sends out a storehouse of chemicals, and dare I say, love, back into its roots so that it can donate its riches to the forest for generations to come in a profound last will and testament. Certainly what we are discovering in forest life is the epitome of sacrament. We see trees, we see a forest, a visible sign of an invisible reality of support, community, and love. And in a fuller understanding of sacrament, there is something in the giving that increases the gift and comes back on itself in this experience of receiving. Have you ever experienced this, where you give something and it feels like you receiving back tenfold? Sacrament is an offering that expands the well-being, the life force in exchange of giving and receiving. This is sacramental living and something that we are all a part of. The forests are not just mothering one another, they're mothering us. The forests store massive amounts of carbon and, in fact, are doing their gut-level best to counterbalance the lopsided ratios of greenhouse gases. That is what scientists are coming to understand, that plants and trees are actually stepping up their game in carbon collection, trying to deal with the imbalance that they sense in the world. Forests spiritually integrate with the human spirit, Susan says. The trees reach out to us as we walk through their presence. They sense us. The poet says, go into the woods and tell them your stories. Do this. The trees are wise. They will bend down to you and listen. There's a reason you feel better when you walk through a forest. I dare say you are being mothered. The characteristics I've listed are not a theologian's wishful take on forests and the qualities of mothering trees. This is what scientists are discovering about forests, and indigenous peoples have lived and breathed in their cultural and religious patterns since time in existence. The forests are talking, they're communicating all kinds of things about flourishing community, structure, nurturing, and this great exchange, this sacramental living that is available to us all. I can't help but think of the journey I took with 18 young women to New Mexico to access reproductive care and abortions about a month ago. As many of you know, this church under the leadership of Reverend Daniel has been in the forefront of trying to support people in these most intimate and profound choices of parenthood within the complexity of their lives and the current laws of Texas. All the women gathered came from different contexts and communities: Asian, Black, Latinx, and white. They were athletes, they were mothers, they were high schoolers, some never having flown before, some who were full of resolve, and others who cried throughout the day. They entered this time as individuals, but within a few hours, they became a forest. I witnessed them nurturing one another, sharing food and stories and nutrients. They held one another's hands, they laughed, they bequeathed blessings on one another in kind words and shared wisdom and some matter-of-fact truth-telling. They loved their kids. They loved their families. Some of them had troubled lives, others knew they were returning to welcoming arms. But through it all, they made room for one another, no matter their circumstances, and gathered one another in. No one was left out. No one. I was in a stand of mothering trees, lending my support and care as well. And I was overwhelmed with the truth that everything is what it seems and more. This is the nature of sacrament, like the forest underground that extends miles below our feet, like what we say and what happens to us. Friends, we are in an uncertain time in so many ways. We don't know what's going to happen or how events will unfold in the coming months and years. We don't know how this ruling might affect other rights and judicial rulings in the days to come. Here's what we do know. We know how to be mothering trees. We know how to do this. This congregation has been at the vanguard of reproductive rights and justice. We've learned a lot. We are understanding more about the difference between a right to reproductive services and being able to access them. That Roe v. Wade was the floor of reproductive rights, not the ceiling of reproductive access. We understand that our work in racial equity, worth, and dignity is paramount as we continue our work for reproductive justice because it's all bound up together. We know how to join in political action and policy initiatives. And we know how to get up at 4 in the morning, get ourselves to church, and meet the women gathered there with food and kind words. We know how to preach a gospel of universal love and acceptance rather than condemnation. We are rooted in the worth and dignity of all human beings, and that we are all connected in this incredible, interdependent forest of life. That what happens to you is part of what happens to me. We know how to be mothering trees, how to be part of this great exchange, this sacrament of nurturing and loving that expands the well-being, the life force in this exchange of giving and receiving. May we honor this forest of communitarians, resilient and strong in our nourishing, protection, and resolve on this most precious Mothering Day. May it be so, and amen.